It's finally time for the big one.
Before we get into this, I want to thank everybody for their support. I'm a paleontology and ornithology researcher, and I also really love Monster Hunter.
So let's get into this absolute monster of a journal entry that I have created for Rey Dau here, who is probably one of my favorite monsters in the entire franchise. I think probably one of the best places to start is to look at the limb anatomy of this animal. The wing of Rey Dau seems to be actually fairly similar to bird wings, which is in line with the old classification of the flying wyverns being considered saurischians rather than pterosaurs, particularly because, unlike a pterosaur, Rey Dau has this giant alula, which is found in avians, birds.
In predatory birds, the alula functions sort of like this part of the wing of a plane, which is called the leading edge slat. Now, the purpose of this big, leading edge slat in birds is usually to slow themselves down prior to landing and adjust aerial maneuverability. What's super interesting about Rey Dau is that it not only seems to do that when the animal is in flight, but it's also kind of weight-bearing. Rey Dau strikes its alula into the ground and drags it through the sand. And because so much of its body is electrically charged, that alula actually ends up picking up what's called fulgurite, which is the electricity-melted sand that Rey Dau creates when it shoots its lightning into the ground.
One thing that I am kind of fuzzy about is the potential length of these ungule bones. I have the ungule bone of the alula being very long because the claw covers most of the wing. But I'm not sure how long the ungules of the main wing body would be. Another interesting thing I got from looking at Rey Dau while it was sitting around was looking at how curved its radius and ulna are. They have this very bizarre sort of curved shape, which I thought was interesting. In terms of the feet, these are very much predatory bird feet. When Rey Dau kills a keratinoth, as you can see here, it usually does so by kind of gently landing on top of a female. It almost always picks a female because the males have these big back spikes that make this difficult. And then it stomps on them with the hallux of its foot, which is this giant claw in the back here. It's the first digit of the foot. It would be like the thumb of your hand, which is very much something that you see in predatory birds. That's the bone of the foot that they use for killing as well. In terms of the shape of the wings on Rey Dau, it has these kind of big non-slotted wings and this huge alula. So it's very optimized for fast, low altitude mobility, which makes sense because, I never see Rey Dau flying super, super high for long periods of time. It's almost always close to the ground, moving relatively fast, which, you need to be very maneuverable if you're spending a lot of your time flying in a sandstorm, which is one of the worst conditions for a big flying animal to be in. Now let's get into the insides of Rey Dau. We'll take a look here at the mouth and the tail.
Now, Rey Dau is in a very interesting spot anatomically when it comes to its mouth, and I cannot wait to get into the taxonomy of the monster under monster, particularly because I think there's some super interesting comparisons to be drawn between Rey Dau and Glavenus and the way that they're sort of starting to integrate their teeth into their rhamphotheca. The rhamphotheca is this sort of keratin plate that you see forming around the jaw here, and in Rey Dau specifically, it's starting to grow over the outer row of teeth.
In terms of the maxilla of Rey Dau, which is the top of its mouth, it has this outer row of teeth, which are growing kind of in tandem with the rhamphotheca, which is something that you see in Pelagornithidae. And then it has these rows and rows of pterygoid teeth in the top of its mouth, which is something that you see in mosasaurs and sometimes eels, I believe.
In the lower jaw, you see a little bit more typical of a tooth arrangement. You have the rhamphotheca here, which is still, just like in the upper jaw, growing around and integrating these lower jaw teeth. And this first row of the teeth sits in the dentary, which is not uncommon. So there's some predatory animals, mostly fish, that have one row of teeth that sit in the dentary and one row of teeth that sit here in the coronoid, which is this inner row. So the two rows of teeth on the bottom are pretty consistent with what we see in the anatomy of Hyneria, which was a large predatory fish that's about 400 million years old. But again, you see the rhamphotheca, which is this yellow keratinous structure, which is made of the same material as, your hair and your nails and the beak of a bird, which is, that's what the outer part of a bird's beak is called, the rhamphotheca, and it's growing around these outer teeth. What seems to be occurring here is that you have a mix of this sort of condition that you see in Pelagornithidae, which is a group of birds, where the jawbone itself is growing into these tooth-like structures, or maybe true teeth. These are definitely not true teeth in Pelagornithidae, but they might be in Rey Dau. But then also set inside the jaw, you have actual, real proper teeth, like you see in this Hesperornis. And even then, there are teeth in the roof of Rey Dau's mouth, just like in a mosasaur. And you can see those right here. Now, the tongue of Rey Dau is not very bizarre at all. The stream structures that we see on the tongue of geese are present on Rey Dau's tongue. In geese, they're generally used for filter feeding, but here I suspect they're probably used to, scrape tissue off of the bones of carcasses, like they are in tigers or lions. This is not the eating hole, by the way. This hole is called the glottis, and it feeds into the respiratory system. And the glottis is low on the tongue in a lot of predators that eat big chunks of meat so they don't choke. The glottis in snakes, for example, is super, super pronounced. And snakes actually kind of stick it out of their mouth to the side so they can swallow something whole and just breathe the entire time. It's basically like a snorkel for your esophagus.
The anatomy of Rey Dau's tail is super interesting, and it feeds into why I think there's a pretty common myth about the way that Rey Dau functions. I've seen a lot of posts around the internet sort of hinting at the idea that Rey Dau might absorb the energy of the lightning strikes and just be like a battery, and that it can't produce its own bioelectricity. This initially kind of convinced me, and I was like, okay, is this plausible? I'll go look into it. Rey Dau is definitely resistant to electrical forces to a bizarre degree, and I think that might be part of it. It definitely gets struck by lightning and lives, and the conditions that allow for lightning storms might favor the conduction of electricity through the air and make it easier for Rey Dau to hunt. But the internal anatomy of Rey Dau is very consistent with an organism that can produce its own electricity. Probably the best evidence of this is the tail.
Just like an electric eel, Rey Dau has these two main electric organs right here that are adapted from the tail muscles, just like an electric eel again. These are modified tail muscles. They used to be a muscle called the ilioischiocaudalis, but the muscle cells have become electrophores, which you can see because they're all kind of jumbled up and white, which is what you would see in an electric organ rather than actual muscle tissue. And then here, there are the remaining 4 tail muscles that still operate and move the tail around.
Secondly, if you take a look at the anatomy of the inside of the horn, which you can if you break it off with a blunt weapon or a slicing weapon, you'll see that inside there are actually 3 distinct bundles of electric organs. And these are all what I would consider main electric organs, which means they're responsible for producing kind of the big electrical shocks. But I divided them here into dorsal, anterior, and posterior electrophores. You can see they're all bundled together and they run down the horn, such that they stick out to the side when, Rey Dau is chilling, and then when it wants to fire a bolt of electricity, they swing forward, and then you get this nice path of conduction down the horn. Another thing that's super interesting, and I believe is evidence of Rey Dau generating its own electricity rather than acting as a biological battery, is the presence of a sax organ, or what I would consider to be an analog for the sax organ, on the neck here.
You can see it very clearly in this picture. There's this kind of light blue line that runs along the neck of Rey Dau, and whenever it shoots a bolt of electricity, it kind of swells up and very clearly active. So I looked at this paper about electric eel discharge and prey capture behavior to get an understanding of the series in which the different electrical organs of the body discharge.
And in electric eels, which I'm using as my model here, they have an organ that kind of primes the main electrical organs, called the sax organ, that shoots out a little bit of voltage, and it kind of gets the other electrical organs ready, and then they all synchronize and they shoot out a big, stunning pulse, which is exactly what happens when Rey Dau fires its bolt horn. So in phase 0, I would call it, Rey Dau is sitting here with its bolt horns open. Phase 1, it'll swing them closed, and then it'll start discharging along the sax organ, which you can see the sax organ swells up and it starts funneling electricity into these main bolt horns. And then stage 2, there is this big giant discharge, which is, as I see here, about 300 million volts. That's kind of a ballpark estimate based on the average voltage of a lightning strike. But it'll shoot out this big bolt of lightning, which creates a big thing of fulgurite if it hits sand, or a bushfire if it hits grass. And then it'll return to stage 0, where it has to let the organs out in the air for them to cool down for a little bit, or something along those lines, just to stabilize the voltage. So that's my, general explanation for how Rey Dau probably produces and directs electricity.
And we know that Rey Dau's discharges are probably about as strong as a lightning strike because they leave similar track marks on the ground. For comparison, to be able to do this as a biological organism,
you would need to emit the electricity of around 500,000 electric eels, which is a lot. And that probably explains why Rey Dau doesn't use its lightning for capturing small prey. I've only ever seen it use its lightning to try and kill big stuff like Doshaguma, which makes sense because it seems like a fairly taxing thing to generate. So yeah, this is my note sheet on Rey Dau. I didn't have to make a binomial name for it because it already has one, Rey Dau. There's a little more stuff I'd like to talk about, so if you want to see a follow-up video, let me know and I'll tell you even more about it. But for now, here's my advice for anyone trying to get out of the way of the lightning strike. Thanks for watching.